Well, thank you, and good morning. What an honor and privilege it is to be here with you today. I'd like to thank the U.S. Naval Institute for the invitation today. What an honor. Thank you, too, for being able to share a little bit of reflection with you on what I think are the major issues that our United States military faces, but more broadly, what the United States faces as we are in this adversarial relationship with China. For those that say that is a strategic competition, I can tell you it is not. It is an adversarial relationship. And I want to touch on several points today. I want to talk about the geopolitical challenge, which I think is as big as it's been in any time in recent history, about the fiscal environment that we face, the challenges that are there, the realities that we face, the force structure of the United States Navy, where it is today, where it needs to be, talking about amphibious fleet, what critically important role it will play in the future, and then Navy and Marine Corps aviation, another critical part of those pillars that are necessary in order to counter the aggression from China. We know that military planners are taught to plan from big to small. So you take the big, the mission, and then you get down to your objectives and you talk about the tactics of how you accomplish the strategy. If you look today in what we see in the Indo-Pacific, it is indeed China's aggression, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but China's aggression around the world. Their intent is to dominate the world. It's not to fairly compete with anybody. It is to dominate the world. They use the policy of transactional coercion. They love to get into these transactional relationships with folks, and then they use that to coerce somebody if the relationship doesn't turn out in their favor, and they're very, very good at that. The 155 nations that I have agreements with today, you ask them if those agreements are in any way, shape, or form to their favor. I think most of them would say the One Belt, One Road initiative is only in China's favor. They are intent on dominating the world, but let's look at where we are today. You know, China is rising, no two ways about it, but make no mistake about it. The United States and its allies are rising also. Think about it. 82 years ago today, December 7th, 1941, this afternoon, 82 years ago, Admiral Yamamoto said this: "I'm afraid we have awoken a sleeping giant." Folks, this is the time in history for the United States to awaken to the threat from China. I think we are at exactly the same point today where this nation is beginning to awaken. The question is will we come out of that slumber fast enough to have an impact to deter China? Listen, we don't want conflict, not in any way, shape, or form. A conflict in that realm with the United States and China will be devastating. Make no mistake about it, if we find ourselves in that position, we will fight and we will win. But I think we have a lot of tools in our tool chest to prevent that conflict. If you look at where we are today, too, we have some fiscal restraints. Look at where we are with our debt and deficit. In the last 364 days, we have amassed $2.4 trillion additional dollars in debt. It's unbelievable. We are at $34 trillion of total national debt, $1.7 trillion of deficit just in the past year. Folks, we cannot continue on that path. I would argue that in the coming fiscal quarters, we're going to find some pretty sobering impacts. In fact, we'll probably find ourselves, based on current interest rates and current track, by the second quarter of next year with nearly $1 trillion of interest that we will pay on the national debt. Our defense budget this year in total is $830 billion. And if we don't think that that interest on the national debt is going to impact what we do as a nation, then we're not awake to the reality of the fiscal reality that faces us. So the question is how do we win strategically within that realm? How do we make sure we do more with our dollars? Folks, the way we win this strategic adversarial relationship with China is we make sure that we get more per our dollar than the Chinese get per their yuan. And we can do that. We are the best creators and innovators in the world. We also have to find ways to attract private capital. This cannot be a 100% funded government enterprise. I think that the big things are beginning to happen in that realm. I see a lot of private equity companies and venture capitalists that want to get into that space. How do we make that happen? I want to make sure that when we buy things, we buy them in the most efficient way possible. We do that by multi-year procurements and block buys. We make sure that we send clear demand signals to the industry and to investors, and we stand by those demand signals. Our problem has been over the last 20 years is everything in the Pentagon ends up being a roller coaster ride. And let me tell you, it's not just the Pentagon's fault. It's Congress's fault also. The roller coaster ride is precipitated by these stopgap spending measures called continuing resolutions. Folks, we've been in a cycle of continuing resolutions now for 18 years. You cannot have consistency if Congress doesn't get its act together. We need to get back on track to adopt appropriations bills on time. That is the key. In that scenario, we also have to grow the size of the United States Navy. Look at where China's going to be. Look at where they are today. And folks used to say, well, don't worry about it. China may have more ships than we have. But, you know, our ships are much better than theirs. Folks, has anybody taken a look at a Liu Yang destroyer? Let me tell you, pretty daggone capable. Don't undersell what the Chinese are doing. Here, put this in perspective. Think about it. If you take all of our shipyards, every single one of our shipyards, and you put that geographic footprint together, it is about the same size as one of the 12 shipyards in China. Think about it. They have the capacity to produce 23.2 million tons of shipping capacity. We can do 100,000. They have a 232 times factor greater capacity to produce than we do. Look at where we are historically. In 1953, 24% of our GDP was manufacturing. Today, as we speak, it's 12%. We couldn't even do what we did in World War II, where we pressed the gas pedal and increased industrial production. Even if we wanted to, folks, there is no accelerator there to press. The question is how do we work smarter? How do we work faster? How do we use technology? How do we use things that don't take a long time to build, don't cost as many dollars, which means let's continue to build the exquisite platforms. We have to build attritable and expendable platforms. That's how we close the gap, and we can do that. We have to make sure that we build fast the places where we have tactical and strategic advantage, especially under the sea. 66 Virginia-class submarines, I think, is at the top of the list. But you know what, folks? We don't get to that requirement until 2049. That metric has to be moved to the left. AUKUS has a great deal of opportunity for us, making sure that in this supplemental we get the $3.4 billion that needs to go to build the submarine industrial base. I think all those things are incredibly important. What's also incredibly important, what I think is a critical part of the pillars of our naval force, of our naval fleet, is the amphibious element. Let's not undersell that. That's why we thought it was so important to put in the law a floor of 31 amphibious ships. That, to me, is key. The ARGMU is an incredibly important pillar in our naval fleet capacity and capability. We have to have that. And look at what's happened here recently. Look at where we couldn't respond to the Sudan embassy evacuation. Look at where we couldn't respond to the earthquake in Turkey. Normally, what happens? Who's first on the scene? The Marines. We missed those opportunities because we didn't have ships to deploy for two reasons. First of all is we don't have the number of amphibs that we need. And second of all is the A sub O, the operational availability of those amphibious ships is just not there. Many of them are in the yard and extended maintenance availabilities. We have to do better there. I want to make sure that we look at, as Representative Moulton said, making sure we're fully implementing Force Design 2030. I think the different elements of that are key. Making sure that we continue to build amphibs, make sure that we have intra-theater connectors like landing ship mediums. Let's call it for what it is, folks. It is not a warship. It is a connector, and we want to make sure that we have that, but it should not be counted as part of the 31 ships that we need. We've taken a good first step this year. We are fully funding, or mostly fully funding, LPD 33. We think that's incredibly important. We want to make sure, too, that OSD CAPE and others understand that when Congress sets a directive like we did years ago on a 4-ship block buy for amphibious ships, that we mean it, that it's not a suggestion. It is a legislative directive enshrined in the law, and the law does mean something. So we want to make sure that those things continue to happen. Look at where we are with Navy Marine Corps aviation. We're very vulnerable in those areas. If you look at where we are with the language in this year's NDAA, we would like to have aircraft to fully operationalize 10 aircraft carriers. We're still going to be at 9 for a while. We look, too, about making sure we finish out the F-18E and F construction buy with Boeing. That contract was for 20 aircraft. It's not going to be 20 aircraft because we've taken so long to get to a final determination on that contract. The number of dollars will not go as far, but those aircraft need to be built. We need to make sure we stay on schedule for F-35Cs to make sure that they're in the fleet, as well as F-35 Bravos. Those are incredibly important. MQ-25 is going to be an incredible extender for our fleet. We're going to be operating in the Indo-Pacific in places that we've never operated before, folks. We're used to having air superiority and then being able to have free range in that battle space. Guess what? That's not going to happen anymore. We're going to have to, at the best, be operating in a contested environment. We're going to have to tank over long distances. MQ-25 gives us that extended range. I think MQ-25, too, has an incredible capability to do ISR and, for that matter, also jamming, but let's make sure it does the basic mission right first. We want to make sure that we, again, finish this contract on F-18Es and Fs. Those things are incredibly important to make sure that we have the air wings that we need. Another incredibly important part of what we have to do, and I just met yesterday with the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, is combat collaborative aircraft is that gap closer that we need, that attritable platform that we combine with our exquisite platforms to really provide capability quickly. I mean, we can go to production in these in months, not years. CCAs are incredibly important. It is the fourth offset. It is how we close the gap. It is how we increase the uncertainty for the Chinese. It's how we create a tactical advantage in ways the Chinese have yet to anticipate. Don't worry about it. They will try to catch up, but we have an opportunity there to do some very good things here. We want to make sure, too, Joint Strike Force Fighter. Joint Strike Force Fighter is an incredibly important platform, but folks, for years, in fact, I would argue from its very inception, the Pentagon has been a hardware-based organization. Let's build the hardware and we'll figure out what makes it work later. Can't do that anymore, folks. The Pentagon enterprise has to be a software-based enterprise. Let's get in there and do the software first, and we know software informs and enables what we can do with the hardware. That's incredibly important. Great example, Joint Strike Force Fighter. Hardware platform incredibly capable. We're waiting today through the second machination of a software upgrade, TR3. It won't be delivered until, at best, the middle of next year. We're not talking about fourth generation. We're just talking about third generation to utilize some of the capacity in that aircraft. We have failed along those lines because we don't have enough test beds. We don't put enough effort into making sure we use digital twin technology. It's kind of like software is an afterthought. Folks, software needs to lead the enterprise in what we do to modernize this military. That's where we can close the gap. And folks, we have an advantage in software. And if we're going to use AI in the way that we need to use it, it is a foundational aspect of what has to happen in the software. Let's make sure that the enterprise in the Pentagon begins with software and we can build hardware around that. I argue, too, as we look in the Indo-Pacific, you know, it's always, well, strategy informs tactics. Folks, the whole mindset has to change. Not only does software have to drive what we do with systems and hardware, but we have to make sure, too, that in the realm that we look at in the Indo-Pacific, that logistics has to inform strategy, and then strategy will inform tactics. Because I can tell you we are massively missing things when it comes to the logistics necessary to operate effectively in that environment. Next generation air defense has to be part of that too. There's some exciting things happening there, but we want to make sure that things are aligned. We want to make sure we have modernized propulsion systems. So NGAP, next generation air propulsion, needs to happen in concurrence with next generation air dominance. The platforms there, the CCAs, the manned aircraft, all those things have to happen in unison. Weapons inventories. Let's look at where we are today with all the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine and other places. And we are absolutely getting our fannies kicked and outsticked by the Chinese on long-range munitions. They can reach out and touch us at long distances. We're going to go Winchester really fast, which means our weapons magazines will be empty in a conflict, literally in the first days of the conflict, because we don't have the long-range weapons. JASSM, LRASM, those things are going to run out quickly, and the Chinese are going to have an advantage over us. We have to not just rebuild those weapons magazines, but we have to modernize. Energetics is part of that, folks. We have done a lot through the years to modernize our precision, and precision is great. Precision is what we need, but you know what? We've allowed our adversaries to outdistance us, and the ironic thing about it is our adversaries use the chemistry of weapons, better known as energetics, propellants, explosives, to their advantage. Why do they have weapons that go farther and have greater lethality? Because they've used the metric of modern chemistry, the modern chemistry metric that we actually developed. It's called CL20. CL stands for China Lake. We developed that. Yet we use UDX, which is a circa 1940s energetic. And we wonder why we're getting our fannies kicked by the Chinese. We've even invented the metric. The good news is this year, the National Defense Authorization Act, I was able to get language in there. We are going to form an Office of Energetics. The enterprise within the Pentagon is going to be to modernize existing weapons platforms to where we get extended range and lethality right now. And everything else is going to be focused on the chemistry of getting where we need to go. Precision is great. Range and lethality, I would argue, is equally as important. We want to make sure, too, that we are supporting our communication sensors, making sure we have greater pipeline capacity. We know as we are working in that battle space, we need low Earth orbit satellites to be able to be the conduits to move that information. We know Link 16 is great, but Link 16 is a pipeline that's getting full right now. If we're going to do the things we need to do with getting massive amounts of target quality data to and from sensors, to and from the shooters, we have to have that pipeline. LEOs are going to be a key part of that. Let's make sure we have a very robust effort there. I want to make sure, too, that we have a program comparable to the Maritime Security Program. It should be called the Constellation Security Program, where the constellations in the air have the ability for us to reserve capacity there. So if the balloon goes up, those civilian constellations have an agreement with the United States military to say, okay, we'll pay you a premium. We're going to flip the switch tomorrow, and all of that capacity goes to military capability. And then the Chinese will not have the capability to take out every satellite. We will have the ability to have layering there, so if comms go out, we can go to the next place. If GPS goes out, we can go to the next place. Those things, I think, are incredibly important. We want to make sure, folks, we have the ability to project force, effective force, as a deterrent effect. Deterrence is going to be the key. We want to be ready to fight. We want to win if we're called to the fight. But I've been through a number of machinations of wargaming. Any of those outcomes, folks, are catastrophic. In fact, in the first weeks of a conflict with China, we're going to be suffering casualties on the magnitude of what we suffered through the entire Vietnam War. Lose multiple aircraft carriers, lose hundreds of aircraft before they even get in the air. Let's talk about it for what this is. It is a pretty sobering moment. But I believe we're up for the challenge. I really do. I think the United States and our allies are rising. AUKUS is a very exciting agreement. Look at what Japan is doing. I was just in Japan. They're doubling their defense budget. I was just in the Philippines. They are all in and allowing us to use facilities at the old Clark and Subic Bay facility to make sure we pre-position supplies. I was just in Taiwan meeting with President Tsai. They are all in, sending their military folks here. They've increased the level of service there, 4 months to 12 months now, mandatory service. Our friends and allies are doing their part. So we got to make sure we combine all that together. That is building, I think, to create an incredible amount of deterrence. So together, I think our U.S. Navy Marine Corps team is going to be at the very tip of the spear. I think we have the ability to get things done. The key is we have to do these things at the speed of relevance. The U.S. and our allies are rising, as well as China. Let's remember what Admiral Yamamoto said 82 years ago today, and what China should look at today as they look at the United States. They have awoken a sleeping giant. With that, let me take your questions, and I'll do my best to give you some answers. Bill? Thank you. Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
So please step up to the microphones and do not give a homily. Please ask a question. And yeah, we'll start over here. Mike.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mike.
I think that we're dancing around the elephant in the room, and that is the lack of political consensus and political will to do what you say. I greatly appreciate your optimism. Why should we, the American public, be optimistic about us being able to solve the problems of the national debt and 19 continuing resolutions? Why should we be optimistic about that?
Well, Mike, I think the reality of this situation demands bold leadership, I think, in every branch of the government. I think the executive branch, the legislative branch, let's call this for what it is. Let's talk about the magnitude of this. Here's what needs to happen. The political will is generated from the public, from the folks that are there each and every day dealing with this. We have to be honest with them and say, here's the magnitude of the debt that we face. Here's the magnitude of the threat we face from China. I think if we ask from the American people the sacrifice that it will take for us to get these things done, I think that they are up for the task. But you can't undersell this. We can't say, oh, everything's going to be fine. You know, $1 trillion of interest payments, not a problem. You know, these things are mind-boggling. And it's not just the discretionary part of the budget. Think about the non-discretionary part, the autopilot spending programs. That is the thing that has to be addressed. And we have to be honest with people to say, listen, if there are going to be any dollars left in Medicare and Social Security, we better address it today. The trustees tell us by 2030, those systems begin to run out of money precipitously. Let's get things done today. For every year we wait, the solutions become harder and more difficult. The challenges around the world become greater. We can do this. We have to be honest with the American people. We need bold leadership. We have to face this head on. If we do that, we can get this done. If we don't, if we keep dancing around it and nibble around the edges, then we're going to find ourselves in places that could be irrecoverable.
Over here, sir.
Yes. Yeah.
Congressman, do you think dramatically increasing our offensive mining capability would have good bang for the buck, both for deterrence and possibly for fighting?
Listen, I think it's a great capability that we have undersold through the years. If you look at our adversaries, they have very advanced mining technology. You know, latency with mines, think about it. You could put a whole network of latent mines out there. They could be very secure in where their location is. They can activate when needed. If not, they sit there. You can maintain them. There are a lot of capabilities that we have there that are very inexpensive, which is the key. They are expendable, so you put them up and they're there. You can replenish them pretty quickly. If you combine them with more robust sensor networks, you know, we're doing more in the UK GI gap. We need to do more in the Indo-Pacific. We are. Most of that's classified. But if you combine more robust sensor networks with more advanced mining like our adversaries do, we could have a tremendous deterrent effect at a very low cost per weapon. Thank you.
Last question over here.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Caroline Tapp from the Naval History and Heritage Command, and my question pertains to your comments on the F-35 and F-18s. We can produce all the airframes that we want, but as we heard in the earlier panel, if we do not have a force of naval aviators to support that, we will run into inevitable errors, both on a strategic and tactical level. So my question is, what investments are being made or should be made, in your opinion, to address the people problem in addition to the production problem?
Caroline, that's a great question. I've had a lot of people said, hey, Rob, don't worry about it because we're going to have all these attritable platforms. They're going to be autonomous. They're going to be unmanned, so we won't need all these pilots. Folks, believe me, when those platforms start out, there may not be a pilot in the cockpit, but there will be a human being in the loop. May not be there, but we're going to need them. And remember, the other aircraft in the air, the F-35s, the NGAD, are all going to be component pieces of this expendable, attritable, exquisite platform network that we create. So, Caroline, you're exactly right. How do we recruit and retain the best and brightest? And it can't just be the United States Naval Academy. We've got a lot of great naval aviators out of there, a lot of great pilots out of there, but that pales in comparison to what we need. I think we have to do more to appeal to people's sense of service nationally. That's been a challenge today for a whole variety of reasons. These political divisions tend to, I think, push people away from the military. The thing that should be the canary in the coal mine to us, and the thing that troubles me, is when I talk to military families, these are military families that are second and third generation military families. They are telling their children today, don't go in the military. That should be a canary in the coal mine signal to us to say, what are we doing to make sure we get back to that? Now, listen, I'm a little biased. I took my grandson the other day, who's 13 years old, took him to Langley Air Force Base and said, look at that F-22, man. Wouldn't you love to be in the cockpit of that aircraft? And he was there watching those aircraft take off and come back. My granddaughter, who's a very gifted athlete, I took her to the United States Naval Academy. I said, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but take a look. So anyway, great opportunities. Anybody today that has aspirations to do great things, to serve their nation, to do something bigger than themselves, to be challenged to the very extent of their capability, and to be able to achieve, should be looking at the United States military. So we've got to do a better job of selling that. And the services are finally getting to it. But we have to also figure, how do we make sure that the negative aspects of what's coming into this? We saw some survey data from the Reagan National Defense Forum this past week that was sobering. It hadn't been that long ago where about 80% of the population held the military in the highest esteem. Today, it's below 50%. That should be pretty sobering to us. So the question is how do we overcome that? Listen, Congress is down there below everything else. Our approval rating is in the single digits. It's been there and it hadn't gone anywhere. But we need to look at the other aspects of that. But it's across society. It's in things like first responders and law enforcement. So all of those things that we normally think about service above self don't now appeal to people the way they used to. We as society better think about that. And it's military, first responders, law enforcement across the spectrum. There is no perfect solution to that. It has to start over a long period of time. But all of us have to have conversations with those 10-year-olds, those 13-year-olds, those 16-year-olds. When we do academy days, I tell folks, I want middle schoolers in there. I don't want seniors in high school in there, even juniors in high school. I want those middle schoolers in there because I want them to understand what these opportunities are about. We need to do more in a younger age, because if you wait until these are high school juniors and seniors, at that particular point, a lot of times it's a little bit too late. Not that we shouldn't pay attention to them, but you have to look at how do we build a cadre through the years. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.